On a crisp autumn night, hundreds of people gather at a Michigan farm for a huge Halloween bash.
It's a chaotic kind of scene.
There were drugs being consumed, of course, a lot of alcohol.
Really fun, exciting, a little dangerous.
But it proves too dangerous for one young woman.
All of a sudden, she's gone without a trace.
We were all looking for her.
But even as the community comes together,
we ask that you bring our daughter and our friend, the relative, back to us.
and the missing girl's family pleads for her safe return.
We just want to know where she is. Just please think of it if it was your sister.
The mysterious disappearance sparks disturbing rumors about sinister forces at play that Halloween.
People were saying it was a satanic ritual.
And a tiny farming town fears that terror stalks its fields.
Any parent's worst nightmare, and this is not supposed to happen in small-town farm country, USA.
Monday, October 27th, 2014. It's 4 days before Halloween, when Chelsea Bruck's mother calls the Monroe County Sheriff's Department and reports her daughter missing.
Chelsea had gone to a large Halloween party on October 25th, and she never returned home.
And the 22-year-old isn't answering her phone either.
It was unlike her not to return or not to call and use her cell phone to notify people where she was. She was fairly active on the social media, and her parents and other friends found it troubling.
Once Chelsea is reported missing, sheriff's deputies descend on the property where the party occurred.
It was an annual event. It's a farmstead which has quite a bit of acreage.
Deputies find the ground littered with red cups, beer bottles, bits and pieces of costumes, ghostly reminders of the huge pre-Halloween bash.
There were maybe 8 to 10 bands, maybe about 10 hours of musical entertainment.
It's an event that Chelsea, her friends, and her entire hometown had looked forward to all year.
The whole community gets, you have people come out in from out of town and everything.
We're talking about 800 plus people.
And the result had been a frenzied scene, lit by bonfires and scored by pounding drums and screeching guitars.
My band, Pickaxe Preacher, we're thrash metal. We play really aggressive, real fast, screaming type stuff. It gets the crowd going, a lot of energy in the crowd when you play that kind of music. Really fun, exciting. A little dangerous.
Most people there were drinking or intoxicated. There was drug use there.
You've got faces covered up by costumes. You've got darkness.
But had that darkness and chaos somehow swallowed up an innocent young woman, causing her to vanish without a trace? Born in 1992, Chelsea grew up in Monroe County in the tiny rural community of Maybe, Michigan.
She actually grew up on a family farm that had been the family for quite some time. Her mother worked at a local bank, and her father was a farmer and also worked at the Monroe Library System.
This is a family that, her mother told me they would eat dinner together all the time. They would talk to each other multiple times throughout the day.
And that idyllic small-town childhood had a definite impact on Chelsea's personality.
Chelsea was awesome. She was always happy. She was like one of the nicest person in the world. She was very family-oriented. She was always about her family.
After graduating from high school, Chelsea stayed in Maybe.
She still lived at home with her mother and her father.
While living at home, Chelsea saved up for college, working as a hostess at a restaurant outside the mall in the nearby town of Monroe.
Chelsea's a small-town, normal, average American girl.
She's never been in trouble before. She didn't use drugs. She did like to attend parties with her friends and have fun, though.
And the biggest party in Monroe County, Michigan, was Mike Williams' annual Halloween bash.
Cornfields and farmers surround me, so I can make a lot of noise. Everybody comes and joins in. Everyone always had a good time. People were always anticipating it.
We all go there pretty much every year. Everybody has a great time.
There were food trucks and a bonfire, but the main attraction was the music.
It's always usually heavy metal. They have different shows. They have all different bands play, and he has fire dancers. He's always has something big going on. He always threw the best Halloween parties.
And since 2014 was going to be his 10th annual bash, Mike was determined to outdo himself.
I actually took a week off work prior just to get ready, just getting the tents delivered and getting the Porter Johns delivered. It's just a lot of work.
Mike wasn't the only one working hard in the days before the bash, though. Chelsea had also put in long hours preparing for the party.
She had worked on her costume, which was a poison ivy costume, one of the villains from Batman, for approximately 6 weeks. Painstakingly sitting in front of the TV every night, according to her mother, sewing each leave on.
And finally, on the night of October 25th, everything was perfect. And yet, for all her hours of preparation, excitement, and anticipation, Chelsea almost misses the Halloween party she's been waiting for all year.
Her ride got stuck at work.
She had to find a ride there, and she had a little difficulty doing that.
She spends several anxious minutes on her phone.
She texted and called a couple friends at the party, and eventually one of those friends left the party that she was already at and came and picked up Chelsea to bring her to the party.
And by the time she does finally arrive, the party is packed.
The turnout this year had gone viral, apparently.
There was an invitation sent out to Facebook, and it just kind of blew up.
They had as many as 800 people at this party, where they expected maybe half that many people. And as a result of that, there were a lot of people who didn't know each other.
And even friends have trouble finding one another in the crowd.
Everybody pretty much showed up in costume, which was awesome.
The crowd is so enormous that the organizers struggle to keep things under control.
And I don't think that Mike Williams was expecting this large of a party.
I did have security. We had walkie-talkies. We were in constant communication with each other.
But as the hours pass, the music's relentless beat, the alcohol, and the anonymity of the masks and costumes combine to create an atmosphere, at least among some in the crowd, that anything goes.
It was somewhat out of control, crazy, it was loud, it's dark, people intoxicated under the influence of drugs and alcohol.
And in the middle of that chaotic crowd is Chelsea.
I did see Chelsea that night. We hung out for a little while.
Despite her late arrival, Chelsea appears to be having a great time. And the poison ivy costume she'd worked so hard on proves to be a huge hit.
She was so excited to wear the costume that she had. She worked so hard on that costume.
Over the next several hours, Chelsea dances through the crowd, drinking regularly from a bottle of wine she's labeled poison to go with her costume.
She was drinking like what anyone does at a party.
And when the music finally ends, the amped up and intoxicated crowd is hungry for more.
After the bands were finished playing, a bonfire was lit, and the entire group of individuals, including Chelsea, started making their way towards the bonfire.
But as Chelsea is skirting past one of the tents in the field, she's stopped short by a sudden blow to the face.
She ran into a tent support. I don't think she saw it. She hit her nose rather hard.
The impact leaves her momentarily stunned.
She was bleeding a little bit.
However, buoyed by alcohol and the party atmosphere, Chelsea quickly shakes it off and joins the frenzied crowd gathering around the bonfire.
It was nothing bad, nothing to worry about.
But as it turns out, Chelsea's worries are just beginning. Earlier that night, when she arrived at the party, Chelsea had given her phone to a friend for safekeeping.
The costume that she had apparently didn't have any pockets on it.
And at around 2:30 in the morning, as the bonfire's flames begin to sputter and the party breaks up, Chelsea can't find the friend with her phone or the friend who gave her a ride earlier.
There was some miscommunication, and ultimately all of the friends that were at the party left, thinking that Chelsea was with somebody else. And so by about 3 o'clock in the morning, Chelsea found herself alone.
She began asking people for their telephones so she could call for a ride. She was unable to get a ride from anybody.
And when she reaches the gravel road that leads back to the farm, she decides to try and hitch a ride from the handful of stragglers leaving the party.
She began to walk down the roadway.
She doesn't get far before the glare of headlights approach, and Chelsea turns and waves. But will it be the rescue she hopes for? Or is Chelsea's bad night about to take a terrifying turn? Coming up, could Chelsea have been kidnapped?
Someone mentioned sex trafficking.
Or are darker forces at work?
People were saying it was a satanic ritual.
On Monday morning, October 27th, 2014, Chelsea Bruck's mother called the Monroe County Sheriff's Department and reported her daughter missing.
This was a average 20-something-year-old girl going to a Halloween party, and all of a sudden she's gone without a trace.
She had actually planned to spend the night at a friend's house, so when she didn't come home on Sunday, it wasn't particularly concerning. By late afternoon or early evening, Mrs. Bruck noticed that she still wasn't home, and she did become a little concerned.
It wasn't like Chelsea to not let anyone know where she was going. We all were kind of wondering what was going on.
Sheriff's deputies immediately searched the farm where the Halloween party had been held.
It was kind of our ground zero there. We did a intense search of that, just looking for any evidence of Chelsea, where she may have gone. We did not find anything, no evidence.
The investigators also spoke with the party organizer who lived on the property.
I don't think anything I gave them was really of much help besides just the information about the party itself.
And the more the investigators learned about the massive Halloween party, the more they realized what a daunting task they faced.
This was a difficult investigation right from the get-go. Number one, like I said, we had anywhere from 600 to over 1,000 people there. A lot of people had costumes on.
The investigators tried their best, though. They spent most of Tuesday talking to people who'd responded to the original party invite or posted about it on social media.
We just started to try to speak to other people that were at the party and get an idea of if they saw Chelsea, if they had any idea where she may have gone.
Unfortunately, few partygoers saw anything suspicious.
There's like 800 people there. I mean, how are you going to know what happened?
Your best friend could have been standing next to you and you didn't know it because they could have had a mask on.
The investigators did hear plenty of rumors, though.
Someone mentioned sex trafficking. We are right in the middle of Toledo and Detroit, so it's really, really big in our area. So that was very possible that maybe someone just picked her up.
And then there were the rumors that took an even darker turn.
People were saying, it was a satanic ritual that we burned her alive.
Was it possible Chelsea had been some sort of human sacrifice? The investigators did follow up on the rumors.
And they actually searched my bonfire. I mean, it was pretty intense.
But there was no evidence of human remains in the ashes, and no sign of Chelsea in the woods and fields surrounding the farm, despite an exhaustive effort organized by her family.
Any parent's worst nightmare, and this is not supposed to happen in small town farm country USA.
They mobilized more than 1,000 residents of the community to go out and search field by field.
We were all concerned, and as soon as we figured out that she was missing, we were all looking for her.
And in addition to helping with the search, the community organized a candlelight vigil to pray for Chelsea's safe return.
We ask that you bring our daughter and our friend, a relative, back to us.
But would their prayers be answered? On the 29th, 2 days before Halloween, the investigators finally got what they hoped was a promising lead.
There was a composite sketch that was made of someone who they believed was the last person that anyone had seen with Chelsea Bruck.
And that was provided by a vendor for band merchandise, and he actually had saw the male in the sketch leaving the party with Chelsea.
The sketch was immediately released to the media.
We published it, and law enforcement had hundreds of tips coming in trying to figure out who this mystery person was.
Chelsea's mother also put up thousands of flyers.
She would go everywhere and just drop stacks and try and get you to pass them out to people that were walking, put them in your windows.
You couldn't go into a business in Monroe County without seeing Chelsea's face.
Halloween came and went. And then Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's.
They were still actively investigating, but not that many details came out during this stretch of time. Her family, meanwhile, they were still holding out hope.
We just want to know where she is. Just please think of it if it was your sister.
And then, after months of uncertainty, it looked as if the family's persistence and the massive blitz of publicity might finally pay off. It was late March 2015, 5 months after Chelsea's disappearance, and 2 men were scrounging scrap metal at an abandoned industrial site a few miles from where the Halloween party had been held.
It's got several buildings on the property. They were kind of moving things around inside this building.
But in their hunt for things to recycle, the scavengers came across something surprising.
The guys found a green leafy costume and a wig.
Puzzled, the 2 men left the wig and leotard where they found it.
They did not realize the significance of the costume.
But about a week later, on April 5th, one of the scavengers came across one of the flyers featuring Chelsea in her poison ivy costume.
He noticed a resemblance with the costume that he had located in the building, and that's why he contacted the police and alerted them to what he had discovered.
We obviously collected his evidence and we sent it to the Michigan State Police Crime Laboratory. They are the ones that process evidence for us in cases. And they were able to tell us upon swabbing the costume for DNA that Chelsea Bruck's DNA was on there.
But the crime lab found more than just confirmation that the costume was Chelsea's.
There was a DNA of an unknown male.
And the condition of Chelsea's leotard provided a chilling clue to just how the mystery DNA had gotten there.
Both straps of the leotard and the crotch of the leotard were completely severed.
That kind of put thoughts in everyone's head.
The condition of the leotard certainly suggested a sexual assault.
But who was the sexual predator who'd assaulted Chelsea? Hoping for a clue to his identity, the investigators took the mystery DNA sample and entered it into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system.
CODIS is a nationwide database containing DNA information from anyone who's ever been convicted of a major crime in the United States and people whose DNA becomes part of the system for whatever reason.
After almost 6 anxious months, would the authorities finally have a name to go with the mystery man in the composite sketch?
The person's DNA that was recovered from Chelsea's costume was not in the CODIS system. We have a DNA sample, but we do not have a name to go with it.
It was a crushing disappointment for the investigators, and it wouldn't be the last. It's April 24th, 2015, 3 weeks after the discovery of Chelsea's Halloween costume, and a man is working with heavy machinery in the woods a few miles from the abandoned industrial site where the leotard had been found.
He planned to build a residence there. He was in the process of putting fill dirt in.
But when the truck arrives with the dirt, the construction hits a snag.
He had a truck driver, I believe, that was stuck.
The owner of the property went back around and behind the truck to try and assess the situation.
But what he's about to find is far more than he expects. A horrifying discovery that will leave a family devastated and a community gripped by fear. Coming up, will a chance discovery change the entire investigation?
And the detective said, "You guys, drop what you're doing right now."
Or will it raise new questions about her disappearance?
He claims that Chelsea asked him to choke her.
On April 24th, 2015, Almost 6 months after Chelsea Bruck disappeared after a Halloween party on a rural Michigan farm, a man doing construction work found human remains on a nearby property.
It fit the same size, description as Chelsea. We couldn't tell for sure, obviously, because it was decomposed, but we didn't have any other missing females with blonde hair in the area at that time.
It wasn't until a couple days later that the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office officially identified the body as Chelsea through dental records.
Not only did the medical examiner determine once and for all that the 22-year-old was dead, the autopsy also revealed Chelsea's last horrific moments alive.
Her jawbone right here was cracked in two. It was split right in two.
It appeared clear to us that Chelsea had been beaten to death in the process of being sexually assaulted.
But while friends and family were devastated by the news of Chelsea's death, the whole community was frightened by the chilling details of her murder.
Knowing that something like that could happen in such a small town, the whole community was concerned.
Even more troubling, the investigators still had no leads on the killer.
There was no DNA or other trace evidence discovered on the body itself.
And in the weeks and months that followed, the case went cold. By July 21st, 2016, it had been more than a year and a half since Chelsea's murder.
Everybody's thinking, are we ever going to get any answers?
No one knew who possibly could have done this.
But would an unexpected breakthrough change everything?
In July of 2016, I'm sitting in the detective bureau, and we were discussing some other things, the detectives and I, about another case.
And then another detective rushed into the room.
She kind of cut us off and said, "You guys, drop what you're doing right now. We just got a DNA hit on the Bruck case."
The DNA matched a man who'd recently been arrested on an unrelated charge, 27-year-old Daniel Clay. Born in 1988, Daniel Clay had grown up in Monroe County, but his upbringing was nothing like Chelsea's idyllic childhood.
Daniel kind of got the short end of the stick at birth. His mom was in prison when he was born.
Daniel's mother put him up for adoption, but that wasn't the end of his tumultuous childhood.
His adopted parents that took him in, they ended up divorcing.
Daniel was only 5 when his parents split.
He lived with his adopted dad, and it was just the two of them until his dad passed away.
Daniel was 17 when his adoptive father died.
At that point, he was placed for whatever reason in the Monroe County Youth Center, which is a home for lack of a better word, wayward boys and girls.
He has been in trouble several times. He did do drugs, probably since he was a teenager.
Once he turned 18, Daniel was out of the youth center, but his prospects were grim.
Worked at a gas station, he worked at a restaurant, he did odd jobs. And I don't think he was employed at any one place for more than a year.
He never had a stable place to live either. In fact, for most of his adult life, he was essentially homeless.
He basically lived with people, lived from couch to couch or person to person and girl to girl.
Daniel got one of those girls pregnant, but skipped out soon after the baby was born.
He always had warrants for child support.
And that was far from the only trouble Daniel got himself into.
He got a couple assault and batteries, resisting and obstructing. He had a marijuana charge.
His most recent trip to jail had been 2 months earlier, in May of 2016.
He had been arrested for larceny that the city police handled here in Monroe.
For the theft of a backpack, he'd barely spent a night in custody. But thanks to a recent change in state law, that was enough to get his DNA into the system.
Authorities were allowed to collect the DNA of people who were arrested for felonies.
It took a little bit, and then we were notified that his DNA did match the one on the costume.
Their first lead in almost 2 years, the investigators wasted no time in tracking Daniel down.
He was living in a mobile home park not far from where the party was.
But could they back up their DNA evidence with a confession? Hoping to get Daniel into the interrogation room before they revealed what they knew about Chelsea's murder, the investigators needed an excuse to bring him in. And thanks to Daniel's troubled past, they had no problem finding one.
He had a warrant for child support. So we were going to use that child support warrant to arrest him and bring him in.
And on July 22nd, everything was in place.
We had 2 deputies that went up, knocked on the door for probably 15 to 20 minutes.
Daniel didn't answer, though. He went out the back.
Daniel Clay tried to run, but was ultimately apprehended by deputies that were behind the residence.
The deputies placed Daniel in the back of a cruiser and drove him to the Monroe County Sheriff's Office.
He was under the assumption at that time that he was just being arrested for his child support warrant.
But after the investigators booked Daniel on the child support warrant, they sat him down for questioning and slowly, over the course of the interview, turned to the night of the Halloween party.
Have you ever heard of Chelsea Brock? Yeah, it's all over the news and stuff.
We told him that his name came up as attending the Halloween party that Chelsea went missing from.
Although, according to Daniel, he hadn't stayed long.
So you left at 10 o'clock or 11. Were you by yourself? Did you leave with anyone? I was by myself. Did you ever see Chelsea? Not that I know of. Like, I don't know who she was, so, someone like that is just not going to stick out to me. Like, you know how many people were at that party?
What we do is we try to lock someone in a time frame into a story.
And then, once Daniel had told the investigators his version of what happened that night, the questioning took a confrontational turn.
What if I told you that your DNA was on her?
He was adamant that he had no contact with her, that he didn't know her, that he never saw her.
I will actually show you, all right, what I have from the crime lab. Okay. All right, and I'm telling you that your DNA is on there. I have no idea how. So we need to figure out how it got there. I have no idea.
Daniel quickly took advantage of the opening the investigator had offered.
It was a little turning point where maybe he did have sex with somebody in the back of a car at a party that night.
I honestly don't think it was her that I had sex with. But it's a possibility. Well, you said I'm saying it could be. I remember having sex with her, but she wasn't blonde. She had dark hair. Wasn't Chelsea blonde or something? She was wearing a wig. Oh, I didn't know that.
But even if it had been Chelsea in the back of the car, Daniel denied killing her.
Oh, she was fine and breathing when I left her. She got out of the car and walked away.
Although by then, the investigators were growing tired of Daniel's denials.
Look at me. Look at me. No. Look at me. I didn't do anything. You had no intent. I had sex with Daniel. I was wasted. You had no intent. You had no intent to hurt her. I just have to think of this. I understand. But we need to do this. I know we need to do this right now. You had no intent. You understand? Yeah.
After insisting for a little bit that he wasn't sure how that happened and he had nothing to do with it, Mr. Clay then kind of broke down.
And as he broke down, his story changed again.
He says, I remember this chick walking down the side of the road, so I pulled over.
Yeah, I say to you. I said, I'm going. I'm like, you want to come with me? She's like, let's go.
Although, according to Daniel, Chelsea had been looking for more than just a ride home.
Daniel Clay claims that Chelsea wanted to have sex.
Daniel said that he'd driven Chelsea a few miles down the road and pulled over in a secluded spot.
They get in the back seat of the car. They begin to have sex.
Wild sex, according to Daniel.
She did get freaky. Explain to me freaky. Like biting me and smacking me, and I was choking her and smacking her.
It was what Chelsea wanted, according to Daniel.
He claims that Chelsea asked him to choke her.
But Daniel said that somehow, in the midst of the encounter, things took an unexpected and tragic turn.
For a minute, and then she kind of stopped and she went limp. I'm like, and I started tapping her face, and I guess I choked her too hard or something. I wasn't even choking her that hard, I didn't think.
He pulls her out of the car. He tries to perform CPR.
She didn't respond, nothing. Like, there was no pulse.
Chelsea Bruck was dead. And according to Daniel, he was panicked.
Daniel Clay said that he was intoxicated by drugs and alcohol, he wasn't thinking right, and decided to get rid of the body. He never considered taking her to the hospital, but he just began to drive around. And he eventually just, while driving around, he came across an area where he had previously went for drives to smoke marijuana and decided that would be the place to get rid of the body.
You pull her out of that car and you put her in that place. What happened then? I sat there, I cried my ass off for like 20 minutes.
Daniel's confession fit with much of what the investigators already knew, but not everything.
He never described how the injuries occurred to Chelsea's face.
And the discrepancy between Daniel's confession and what they knew about the extent of Chelsea's injuries was more than enough for the authorities to charge him with murder.
There's more to what Daniel Clay told us that happened that night.
Coming up, Daniel tells the rest of his story from the witness stand.
He thought maybe she just passed out on him.
But can the defense explain Chelsea's horrific injuries?
The fractures to the skull could well have been caused after death.
On May 8, 2017, 28-year-old Daniel Clay went on trial at Michigan's Monroe County Courthouse for the murder of Chelsea Bruck.
The courtroom was packed. This was a girl who was well loved by the community. She had a lot of friends.
We all just wanted to know what he said in that interview room and hear what he had to say.
It had been almost a year since Daniel had confessed to killing Chelsea after a Halloween party in 2014.
He told authorities that this was an accident, that he didn't mean for it to happen.
And he still stood by his claim. In fact, shortly before the trial was set to begin, Daniel and his defense attorneys turned down the offer of a 35-year sentence in return for pleading guilty to second-degree murder.
We believe that this case represented a manslaughter case, that Daniel Clay's actions as described in his testimony represented a consensual sex act gone awry.
However, in their opening statement, the prosecutors argued that the presence of Daniel's DNA on Chelsea's torn leotard told a very different story.
The costume was shown to the jury, and it was apparent that there was some trauma that had occurred. The straps to the costume and the crotch were completely severed. This was a murder committed during the course of a felony offense, criminal sexual conduct.
Criminal sexual conduct. It's what we call rape here in Michigan.
And according to the prosecution, the alleged rape was only the beginning of the trauma that Chelsea suffered.
If this was consensual, then why did she have all of these injuries?
According to the medical examiner's testimony, Chelsea had a broken jaw, missing teeth, and a fractured orbital socket.
The cause of death was determined to be multiple blunt force blows to the face.
Instantly, when you hear that, you know it's not an accident. It was a vicious beating.
And according to the medical examiner's testimony, that wasn't all that argued against Chelsea's death being a tragic accident, as Daniel claimed.
He claimed that she died even though he had choked her only a total of 20 to 30 seconds, and that she had been responsive for 15 seconds. If you do the math on that, that means that she had died only 15 seconds after losing consciousness. The medical testimony at trial, however, concluded that you would have to strangle somebody, manually strangle someone, hard enough to cut off all air or blood flow to the brain for an additional 2 minutes post-loss of consciousness.
To drive the point home, the prosecutors staged what they hoped would be a powerful demonstration.
The chief prosecutor presented a CPR mannequin to demonstrate to the jury, even if you bought Daniel Clay's story that he had asphyxiated her, accidentally during a consensual sexual act, the amount of time it would take to actually kill someone via strangulation. So he sat in front of that jury for 2.5 minutes, holding his hands around the mannequin's neck.
Daniel Clay's story is not credible. There's no way that he could have strangled Chelsea to death in only 15 seconds.
And according to the prosecution, that made Daniel guilty of murder.
The prosecutor's theory was that Mr. Clay sexually assaulted Ms. Bruck. And because he did that, you could then infer that he was guilty without finding that he deliberately, intentionally premeditated the death of Chelsea Bruck.
But would the jury agree? When it was the defense's turn, the jurors got the chance to hear Daniel's story firsthand from the witness stand.
Daniel Clay testified at trial. He did his best to explain to the jury what happened that day.
He was fairly calm and collected.
And he stuck by his story that Chelsea's death was an accident.
Daniel Clay claimed that this was something that was consensual between the two of them, and he had no intention of hurting this young woman.
In fact, Daniel testified that since they were both intoxicated on the night of the party, it took him a minute to even realize that he had hurt Chelsea.
He said at first he thought maybe she just passed out on him.
And Daniel claimed that when he couldn't wake her, he'd tried to save her.
He said at that point he tried to do CPR, however, she was unresponsive and lifeless.
However, as the prosecution pointed out on cross-examination, there was one thing that Daniel didn't do: call 911.
That is something that the prosecution really hammered him on. You know, if this was an accident, why didn't you just immediately report this to the police to try and get help?
Mr. Clay indicated that his cell phone was dead. He could not have called for help at that time.
But even if all that was true, how did the defense explain Chelsea's horrific injuries?
Our experts at the trial indicated that the injuries to the skull could have occurred up to 3 hours after death.
Either when Daniel drug Chelsea's body out of the car.
One of the explanations was that he may have slammed her head in the car door.
Or after Daniel had thrown Chelsea's body into the shallow depression that served as her makeshift grave.
He says that once he dumped her body, he took some leaves and some sticks and logs and covered her body.
Our expert testified that the fractures to the skull could well have been caused by a log fallen on the corpse after death. That would explain the injuries that were present in the skull of Chelsea Bruck.
The defense's medical expert also challenged the autopsy's conclusion about cause of death. According to the defense, because Chelsea had been drinking that night, her death could easily have been the result of the brief choking that Daniel described.
Medical expert testimony at the trial indicated that death through deprivation of oxygen and blood flow to the brain could be shortened through intoxication.
And finally, the defense explained just why Daniel had choked Chelsea in the first place.
Chelsea died during what we call erotic asphyxiation.
Erotic asphyxiation is when the participants in sexual activity engage in depriving the other of oxygen to heighten their orgasm experience.
And according to the defense's closing argument, that meant Daniel wasn't the monster and sexual predator that the prosecution made him out to be.
What he did was dumb. But it wasn't any of the things that are necessary to find a first-degree premeditated murder.
Coming up, will the verdict finally bring peace for Chelsea's family?
We really wanted them to have some closure.
Or will their quest for justice end in another tragic loss?
It was heartbreaking to see their reaction.
On May 16th, 2017, the jury announced that they had reached a verdict in the trial of Daniel Clay. The 28-year-old was charged with the murder of Chelsea Bruck after a wild Halloween party in 2014.
We don't know Daniel Clay's intent, whether he went to the party looking to do this to somebody.
At trial, the prosecutors argued that Daniel had murdered Chelsea in the midst of a sexual assault, making him guilty of felony murder.
We believe that the evidence on the leotard, as well as some of the statements that the defendant made during his interview, warranted that.
But according to the defense, Daniel wasn't a monstrous predator stalking the party in search of victims. Instead, his attorney told the jury that Daniel was simply a drunken kid, guilty of nothing more than negligence and bad judgment.
I wanted them to find Daniel Clay guilty of 2 crimes, improper disposal of a corpse and manslaughter.
Would Daniel's claim that the sex was consensual and that the choking was Chelsea's idea be enough to convince the jury to find for manslaughter? All either side knew was that it had taken the jury a surprisingly short time to make a decision, less than 3 hours. Did the jury's quick decision bode well for the prosecutors or the defense?
We, the jury, find as follows: felony murder, guilty. Count 2, concealing the death of an individual, guilty.
The jury found Mr. Clay guilty of felony murder.
Even if you believe Daniel Clay's story, the problem is that the evidence showed a beating.
For Chelsea's family, the verdict marked the end of an emotional ordeal that had lasted almost 3 years.
It was heartbreaking to see their reaction. I know it was a joyful reaction, but, you know, how joyful can you be when you don't have your daughter?
Although as consolation, they knew that Daniel would never be free to prey on anyone again.
In Michigan, a conviction for first-degree felony murder calls for a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole.
Daniel accepted his fate without emotion.
He did not gasp. He did not cry.
The defendant himself, in a subsequent interview, actually described himself as being an effing monster.
And in a world where monsters are real, is anyone really safe?
There are predators out there. There's always someone, whether you...
Rain erased footprints faster than memory. By sunrise, the narrow road outside Ashridge, Ohio, looked untouched, as though nothing had happened during the night. No tire marks, no broken glass, no sign of panic. Just a stretch of wet pavement cutting through endless cornfields, wrapped in a blanket of gray fog. It was the kind of morning people forgot before lunch, until someone noticed the car. It rested halfway down a shallow ditch, headlights still glowing weakly through the mist. The engine had long gone silent, but the driver's door hung open just enough to sway with every cold gust of wind. The radio whispered static between fragments of an old country song. Coffee steamed inside a paper cup, sitting perfectly upright in the cup holder. A handbag remained on the passenger seat. The keys were still in the ignition. There was no driver. Deputy Mark Hensley reached the scene at 6:42 a.m. expecting another drunk driver who had wandered off into fields. Instead, he found something he would remember for the rest of his career. The inside of the sedan was almost spotless. No blood. No shattered windows. No signs of a struggle. Nothing missing except the woman who had been driving it less than 12 hours earlier. Her name was Caroline Mercer, 32 years old, elementary school teacher, married, mother of a 7-year-old son, known throughout Ashridge as a woman who never missed church, never forgot birthdays, and never drove anywhere without calling home first. The previous evening, Caroline had left the annual school fundraiser shortly after 9:30. Witnesses remembered her laughing while carrying a tray of leftover brownies to her car. Several parents watched her wave goodbye before pulling out of the parking lot. Home was less than 15 minutes away. She never arrived. At first, everyone assumed the storm had forced her to stop somewhere. Her husband, Daniel, spent most of the night calling relatives, hospitals, and police departments before finally reporting her missing just after 4 in the morning. 2 hours later, her car appeared, empty, waiting, almost staged. The first officer searched every inch of the surrounding farmland. Nothing. Dogs followed Caroline's scent from the driver's seat to the shoulder of the road. Then the trail ended, abruptly, as though she had simply vanished into thin air. Veteran investigators hated scenes like this. No direction. No obvious crime. No body. No witness. Only silence. By afternoon, helicopters circled over miles of farmland, while volunteers formed long lines across muddy fields. Farmers parked their tractors to help. High school students skipped football practice to join the search. Churches opened kitchens to feed exhausted volunteers returning soaked from the rain. Ashridge had fewer than 6,000 residents. Everyone knew Caroline. Everyone searched. No one found her. Detectives began reconstructing the final hours of her evening. Nothing looked unusual. She taught class. She attended the fundraiser. She joked with coworkers. She called Daniel at 8:57 p.m. "I'll be home soon." Those would become the last confirmed words anyone ever heard her speak. The phone itself disappeared. So did her house keys. Everything else remained inside the abandoned vehicle. Investigators quickly considered the obvious possibilities: a random abduction, a voluntary disappearance, a domestic dispute, a robbery gone wrong. Each theory collapsed almost as quickly as it appeared. Caroline had withdrawn no money. Her bank account remained untouched. No extra clothing had disappeared from the house. Her passport stayed inside a bedroom drawer. Friends described her marriage as ordinary. Neighbors reported hearing no arguments. Daniel willingly submitted to questioning that lasted nearly 11 hours. His timeline held together. Multiple witnesses placed him at home with their son, while Caroline drove back from a fundraiser. Polygraph results proved inconclusive, as they often did. Still, detectives found no physical evidence linking him to her disappearance. The investigation widened. Roadblocks appeared on highways across 3 counties. State police interviewed truck drivers, gas station clerks, motel owners, and late-night restaurant employees. Thousands of tips flooded the sheriff's office. Most led nowhere. One elderly woman insisted she saw Caroline standing beside Highway 14 shortly before midnight, talking to a man wearing a long black coat. Another caller claimed she recognized the abandoned sedan being followed by an old blue pickup truck. Neither story could ever be verified. The rain had erased nearly everything investigators hoped to recover. Footprints disappeared. Tire impressions dissolved into mud. Fibers washed away. Evidence that might have solved the mystery before breakfast simply ceased to exist. Then came the first strange discovery. 3 days after Caroline vanished, a local teenager searching along Beaver Creek found a single high-heeled shoe. It matched the pair Caroline had worn that night. The shoe rested carefully on top of a flat stone overlooking the water, not buried, not hidden, displayed. There were no footprints nearby, no fingerprints, no blood. Search teams spent another week combing every inch of the creek. Divers entered freezing water. Nothing else surfaced. The shoe raised more questions than answers. Had someone placed it there intentionally? Was it carried downstream? Or had investigators completely misunderstood where the crime had happened? Newspaper headlines grew larger with every passing day. Local teacher vanishes. No trace after midnight drive. Ohio mother still missing. Television crews arrived from Columbus and Cincinnati. Satellite trucks lined the courthouse lawn. National reporters interviewed frightened residents beneath umbrellas, while children stared quietly from school bus windows. Ashridge stopped feeling like a quiet farming town. It became a mystery everyone believed would soon be solved. Instead, the case grew stranger. Detective Raymond Cole, assigned as lead investigator, noticed something odd while reviewing photographs from the abandoned car. The driver's seat sat unusually far back. Caroline stood barely 5'4". She never drove with the seat positioned that way. Daniel confirmed it immediately. She always kept it close. Someone had moved it. Crime scene technicians checked again. No usable fingerprints beyond Caroline's and the responding officers. No unknown hair. No obvious fibers. Nothing. If another person had driven the vehicle, they had left almost no trace. Cole refused to believe in perfect crimes. He believed criminals always made mistakes. Always. The challenge was finding them before time buried the evidence forever. Weeks turned into months. The Mercer family tried to continue living. Daniel returned to work. Their son, Ethan, stopped asking when his mother would come home. Instead, he began sleeping with a hallway light on. Neighbors noticed he rarely smiled anymore. Every birthday left one chair empty. Every Christmas brought another unopened present beneath the tree. Hope slowly transformed into routine grief. Still, Detective Cole refused to close the file. He pinned hundreds of photographs across an entire office wall. Maps, phone records, witness statements, handwritten timelines. Every tiny inconsistency received another colored pushpin. He studied Caroline's route repeatedly. Only 12 miles separated the school from her house. Yet somewhere inside those 12 ordinary miles lay an invisible moment that erased a woman without leaving a single answer behind. One autumn evening, nearly 5 months after the disappearance, another call reached the sheriff's office. Issue. The caller spoke only one sentence. "You're searching in the wrong county." Then the line went dead. Telephone records traced the call to a public payphone nearly 70 miles away. No surveillance cameras existed. No witnesses remembered seeing anyone unusual. Investigators expanded the search anyway. Nothing. The anonymous call joined dozens of unanswered mysteries already filling the file. Then rumors began spreading through Ashridge. Some claimed Caroline had uncovered financial corruption involving local officials. Others whispered she had secretly planned to leave town. A few insisted they saw unfamiliar men parked outside the school weeks before she vanished. Every rumor sounded convincing. None survived investigation. Meanwhile, Detective Cole kept returning to one impossible question. Why abandon the car? If someone intended to make Caroline disappear forever, leaving her vehicle beside a public road made little sense. Unless the car itself was never the original crime scene. That possibility changed everything. Forensic teams dismantled the sedan almost bolt by bolt, seats removed, door panels opened, carpets lifted, the trunk stripped bare. Underneath the passenger seat, they discovered a tiny brass button, not from Caroline's clothing, not from Daniel's. No manufacturer could identify its origin. It became Exhibit 47, another mystery with no owner. Months later, laboratory reports returned. No fingerprints. No biological material. Nothing investigators could use. Winter arrived. Snow covered the cornfields where volunteers had once walked shoulder to shoulder searching for answers. Media attention faded. National reporters left. Only local newspapers continued printing Caroline's photograph beside the words everyone had begun to fear. Missing, Detective Cole visited the Mercer house one final time before Christmas. He found Ethan sitting on the living room floor, coloring a picture. A small house, a bright yellow sun, 3 smiling figures holding hands. One drawn in blue crayon stood slightly apart from the others. Cole asked softly, "Who's that?" The boy looked up without smiling. "That's Mom." "Why is she so far away?" Ethan stared at the picture for several seconds before answering. "Because she can't find the road." Cole left the house carrying a weight heavier than any evidence box. Back at the sheriff's office, he unlocked the evidence room after midnight and stood alone before Caroline Mercer's belongings. Her purse, her watch, her glasses, her wedding ring, recovered from the cup holder where she had apparently removed it during the drive. Everything that remained of an ordinary life fit inside 3 cardboard boxes. He closed them slowly. Then his eyes stopped on something he had overlooked dozens of times before. a stack of enlarged crime scene photographs. One image showed the inside of the driver's door under bright forensic lighting. Most investigators saw nothing. Cole leaned closer. There, barely visible near the chrome door handle, a faint smudge interrupted the powder pattern, almost invisible, too incomplete to classify, too small to matter, or so everyone believed. He stared at it for nearly a minute. Then he quietly whispered to himself, "What if that's a mistake?" The photograph remained on Detective Raymond Cole's desk for 6 straight days. Every morning, he arrived before sunrise. Every night, he left after the building went quiet. The same image stayed beneath the cold fluorescent light. The inside of Caroline Mercer's abandoned sedan. The driver's door. The chrome handle. The faint, almost invisible disturbance in the fingerprint powder. A mark so small that 3 different technicians had ignored it. A mark that had been buried beneath hundreds of pages of reports, thousands of photographs, and months of unanswered questions. But Cole had spent 25 years investigating crimes. He knew something most people forgot. Mistakes were rarely dramatic. They were usually tiny. A dropped object. A wrong word. A single movement made by someone who believed nobody would ever notice. And sometimes, a fingerprint. The next morning, Cole requested the original evidence from storage. The request surprised everyone. The case had been inactive for months. The file was no longer considered a priority. The town had moved on. The newspapers had stopped printing Caroline's name. But Cole was still looking, still searching, still refusing to accept that a person could disappear without leaving behind a single answer. At 8:15 a.m., the evidence box arrived. Inside were the same items investigators had examined countless times. Caroline's purse, her keys, the coffee cup, the photographs, the clothing, and the fingerprint lift sheets collected from the vehicle. Cole carefully reviewed every piece. The original technicians had done everything correctly. The surface had been processed. The prints had been photographed. The usable fingerprints belonged to Caroline and responding officers. Nothing unusual. Nothing that could move the case forward. Until Cole compared the old photographs with the new enhancement scans. The strange mark near the door handle was not random. It was not a smudge. It was a partial print. Incomplete. Damaged. But a print. Someone had touched the inside of that door. Someone who was not supposed to be there. For the first time in nearly a year, the case had something it had never possessed before. A direction. The print was immediately sent to the state crime laboratory. The waiting began. And waiting was the hardest part of every investigation. Because hope was dangerous. Hope created expectations. Hope made families believe answers were coming. And too many times, answers never arrived. Caroline's disappearance had already destroyed 1 year of lives. Her parents aged visibly. Her husband stopped attending community events. Her son, Ethan, had grown quieter. The town learned how to live with a question that never had an ending. Then, 3 weeks later, the phone rang. It was the laboratory. The analyst sounded different. Not excited. Not certain. Careful. We have a possible match. Cole stood still. After months of nothing, those 4 words felt impossible. The fingerprint belonged to a man named Thomas Vance. 41 years old. Former mechanic. Former employee at a nearby auto repair shop. A man whose name had never appeared anywhere in the original investigation. At first, it seemed like another dead end. Vance had no criminal record connected to Caroline. No known relationship. No obvious motive. But when investigators looked deeper, they discovered something disturbing. Thomas Vance had worked at the same repair shop where Caroline had taken her vehicle 6 months before she vanished. The visit had been routine. An oil change. A brake inspection. A minor repair. Nothing suspicious. But according to shop records, Vance had personally handled Caroline's car. And suddenly, the abandoned sedan was no longer just a vehicle. It was a timeline. A place where 2 lives had crossed. Investigators reopened every interview connected to the repair shop. Former employees were questioned again. Old paperwork was pulled from storage. and one forgotten detail appeared. The day Caroline picked up her car, she complained about a strange noise coming from the driver's side door. A mechanic had written a note. Check handle mechanism. The repair was completed. The note was signed. Thomas Vance. Detectives returned to his last known address. The house was empty. The neighbors said he had moved away years earlier. No one knew where. No one knew why. But investigators discovered something else. Vance had left Ohio shortly after Caroline disappeared. Not immediately, not dramatically, just quietly. A few weeks later, he packed his belongings and moved west. At the time, nobody thought it was suspicious. People moved. People changed jobs. People disappeared from small towns every day. But now the timing felt different. The case that had been frozen for nearly a year suddenly began moving. First, a nationwide search started. Investigators tracked employment records, rental histories, old phone numbers, every piece of information connected to Thomas Vance. They finally found him in Nevada, working under a different name, living alone. When detectives arrived at his apartment, he did not run. He did not fight. He simply looked at the badge in front of him and asked one question. Did you finally find the fingerprint? The room went silent because investigators had never told him about the fingerprint. Not publicly. Not privately. Not anywhere. That sentence changed the entire investigation. Thomas Vance was arrested immediately, but an arrest was not the same as an answer. For Caroline's family, the most important question remained. Where was she? For months, detectives believed finding the person responsible would reveal the truth, but the truth was still hidden. Vance refused to speak. His attorney claimed the fingerprint proved nothing. They argued that he had legally worked on Caroline's vehicle. His fingerprints could have been left there months before. A reasonable explanation. A dangerous explanation, because it created doubt. And doubt was exactly what every defense needed. The prosecution knew the fingerprint alone would not be enough. They needed the story behind it. They needed to know why a mechanic's fingerprint appeared inside a missing woman's abandoned vehicle. They needed to know why he moved away. They needed to know what happened on that dark road in 1987. Detectives searched Vance's previous properties, storage units, vehicles, old belongings. For weeks, nothing appeared. Then a retired investigator, reviewing the original case, found something buried inside the old reports. A witness statement, never fully followed up. A farmer living near the road where Caroline's car was discovered had reported seeing something unusual that night. A second vehicle, parked near the ditch, a dark-colored pickup truck. The witness remembered seeing someone standing beside it, but investigators at the time dismissed the information because the description was unclear. The witness was 80 years old. It was raining. Visibility was poor. The statement was marked as unreliable. Now detectives reopened it. They asked the farmer one question. Do you remember the truck? The old man looked out his window for a long time. Then he answered, I remember the passenger door. Why? Because it stayed open. The detective leaned forward. What does that mean? The farmer swallowed. Because whoever was driving that truck wasn't leaving. A cold silence filled the room. The investigation had spent a year searching for the moment Caroline disappeared. But maybe they had been searching in the wrong place. Maybe the car was never beginning. Maybe it was a final piece of a much larger scene. And somewhere in the forgotten pages of a case file, hidden beneath years of dust and mistakes, was the answer that had been waiting all along. The fingerprint had opened the door. Now detectives had to discover what was standing on the other side. The moment Thomas Vance's name entered the investigation, the entire case changed. For 11 months, Caroline Mercer had been a mystery without a direction, a missing woman, an abandoned car, a single shoe beside a creek, 1,000 theories and 0 answers. Now, for the first time, investigators had a person connected to the scene. But connection was not conviction. And Raymond Cole knew the difference. He had watched too many investigations collapse because detectives became attached to the first person who gave them hope. A suspect could become an obsession. A theory could become a trap. Cole refused to make that mistake. Thomas Vance was not the answer. Not yet. He was only a question, a very dangerous one. The first thing investigators did was rebuild the timeline. Not the timeline they believed, the timeline they had. Every minute, every phone call, every receipt, every witness statement, every forgotten detail. They started with Caroline's vehicle. The sedan had been serviced at Vance's repair shop exactly 6 months before her disappearance. The repair order showed that Vance worked on the driver's side door mechanism. A small repair. A simple repair. A job nobody would have remembered if Caroline had returned home that night. But she never did. Detectives pulled the original paperwork from the shop archives. The invoice was faded. The ink was almost gone. But one line remained clear. Customer complaint. Door handle sticking. That detail bothered Cole, because the fingerprint was not found on the outside handle. It was found inside, on the edge where someone would place their fingers after opening the door from the driver's seat. Someone sitting there. Someone entering. Someone leaving. Or someone moving Caroline's vehicle after she was already gone. The question became unavoidable. Why was Thomas Vance inside Caroline's car on the night she disappeared? The answer was hidden somewhere in the missing hours between 9:30 p.m. and midnight. 3 hours. 3 hours that had destroyed an entire family. Investigators returned to Ashridge. The town reacted differently this time. The first search had been filled with fear. This one was filled with anger. People who once defended everyone now questioned everything. Neighbors who had said, "Something like this doesn't happen here," now locked their doors before sunset. The old fear returned, the fear that had never truly disappeared. Because Caroline was not just a missing person anymore. She was a reminder that someone had walked through their streets, carrying a secret for decades. The sheriff held a press conference. He confirmed that new evidence had been discovered. He did not reveal the fingerprint. He did not reveal Vance's name. But the message was clear. The case was alive again. And somewhere, someone was watching. Within hours, tips flooded back in. Some were useless. Some were impossible. But one message caught investigators' attention. A woman named Laura Bennett called the sheriff's office. She said she had worked with Thomas Vance years earlier. She had never spoken before because she was afraid she would be wrong. But after seeing the news, she remembered something. A conversation. A strange conversation. 2 weeks after Caroline disappeared, Vance had shown up at work late. His hands were shaking. His clothes were soaked. Laura remembered asking him what happened. His response never left her mind. He said some things don't stay buried forever. At the time, she thought he was talking about personal problems. Now she wondered if he was confessing something without realizing it. Detectives interviewed Laura for 4 hours. They asked the same question repeatedly. Did he ever mention Caroline? She hesitated. Then she answered, not her name. Then what? He mentioned the road. Cole looked up from his notes. What road? Laura stared at the table. The road where they found her car. The room became silent, because that road had never been released publicly as a crime scene location. Not the exact location. Not the details. Not enough for a stranger to know. Investigators immediately checked Vance's background. They discovered something they had missed. Thomas Vance lived only 9 miles from where Caroline's vehicle was discovered. At the time of the disappearance, he claimed he was home alone. No witnesses. No confirmation. Just his word. For the first time, investigators had a suspect. A possible motive. And a timeline that no longer looked accidental. But they still needed more. A search warrant was approved for Vance's storage unit in Nevada. Inside were boxes of old photographs, repair manuals, tools, and personal belongings. Most were meaningless. Then investigators found a small envelope hidden beneath a loose floor panel. Inside was a collection of photographs. Not family photographs. Not vacation pictures. Pictures of cars. Dozens of vehicles. Different years. Different models. At first, Detectives thought it was strange but harmless. Then they noticed one pattern. Every vehicle had been photographed from the driver's side, every single one. They searched deeper. At the bottom of the envelope was a photograph that stopped the entire investigation. A silver sedan, parked beside a rural road. The picture quality was poor. The image was old, but detectives recognized it instantly. The vehicle was Caroline Mercer's car. The photograph had no date, no location, no explanation. Only one thing written on the back. 3 words. Still remember everything. Forensic analysts examined the photograph. The paper was old. The image was genuine. The question was no longer whether Vance had seen Caroline's car. The question was why he had kept a photograph of it for years. When investigators confronted Vance with the image, his calm disappeared. For the first time since his arrest, he looked afraid, but he still refused to explain. Instead, he asked another question. Did you find the other one? Detective Cole froze. The other one? Vance looked down. The fingerprint. Whose fingerprint? Vance said nothing. That silence was louder than any confession, because it suggested something investigators had not considered. Maybe Thomas Vance was not the only person involved. Maybe the fingerprint that reopened the case was not pointing toward the person who made Caroline disappear. Maybe it was pointing toward someone who knew exactly what happened. Someone who had stayed silent for years. The investigation expanded again. Phone records, old friendships, former co-workers. Every person connected to Thomas Vance was examined. Then detectives discovered a forgotten name. Michael Rourke, a former employee at the same repair shop. A man who left Ohio 1 month after Caroline disappeared. A man whose name appeared nowhere in the original investigation. A man whose fingerprint had never been compared. Because nobody knew he was connected. The file had been sitting untouched for nearly 4 decades. And buried inside it was a pattern. 2 men, 1 vehicle, 1 missing woman. And a secret that had survived longer than anyone expected. Raymond Cole returned to the evidence room that night. He looked again at Caroline's belongings. The purse, the keys, the photographs, the fingerprint report. For years, the case had been a locked door, but now the lock had turned, and behind it was something far darker than a simple disappearance. Because the fingerprint had not just identified a suspect. It had revealed that someone had been hiding the truth since the very beginning. The name Michael Rourke changed the investigation overnight. For nearly a year, detectives had searched for one person, one mistake, one moment when someone lost control. But now the case had become something much more complicated. 2 men connected to the same place. 2 men connected to the same vehicle. 2 men who left Ohio after Caroline Mercer vanished. And one question that refused to disappear. What happened on that road? Detective Raymond Cole placed the old repair shop records across the conference table. The business had closed years earlier. The building had been sold. The employees had scattered, but the paperwork remained. Names, dates, signatures. A forgotten history preserved inside dusty boxes. Thomas Vance, Michael Rourke. Both worked at the same garage. Both had access to Caroline's vehicle. Both had reasons to know the car. But only one fingerprint had been found. The question was why. If Vance had been responsible, why was Rourke connected? If Rourke was involved, why did Vance's fingerprint appear inside the car? The answer was buried in a detail investigators had overlooked. A repair order from the week before Caroline disappeared. The vehicle had returned to the shop, not for mechanical problems, for a complaint. The driver's side door had started sticking again. The repair was scheduled for the afternoon. The technician assigned was Thomas Vance. But the work order showed something unusual. Another signature appeared beneath his. Michael Rourke. The 2 men had worked on Caroline's car together. 2 people had touched the same vehicle. 2 people who would later disappear from the investigation. Cole stared at the document. For years, investigators believed Caroline's car had been untouched after she left a fundraiser. But what if someone had been preparing for that night long before it happened? What if the disappearance did not begin on the roadside? What if it started inside a repair shop months earlier? The detectives returned to the original crime scene photographs. They enlarged every image: the driver's seat, the floor, the door, the dashboard, the trunk. Then they noticed something. A small scratch near the steering column, almost invisible. The damage was not from an accident. It looked like someone had forced something underneath the plastic panel. Investigators reopened the vehicle examination. Even after all these years, technology had changed. Old evidence could now reveal what it once could not. The sedan was transported back to the laboratory. Every panel was removed. Every hidden space was inspected. Forensic technicians worked through the night. Then, just before sunrise, they found something. Behind the lower dashboard panel was a small piece of fabric, not from Caroline's clothing, not from the interior. A dark blue thread, the same color as a jacket worn by Thomas Vance in an old employee photograph. But it was not enough. A fiber connection, a possibility, not proof. Cole knew better than anyone that evidence had to tell a story, not create one. The investigation needed the missing chapter, and then they found it. A former employee from the repair shop, named David Keller, agreed to speak. He had avoided investigators for years, not because he knew nothing, because he knew too much. Keller was 60 years old now. His hands shook as he held a cup of coffee during the interview. "I thought about calling before," he said. "Why didn't you?" He looked down. "Because I didn't want my name attached to this." Cole leaned forward. "Attached to what?" Keller took a long breath. The night Caroline disappeared. The room became still. After 11 months of silence, someone was finally talking. Keller explained that on the night Caroline vanished, he had driven past the repair shop around 10:45 p.m. The business should have been empty, closed, dark, but the lights were on, and 2 vehicles were parked outside. The first belonged to Thomas Vance. The second belonged to Michael Rourke. "Did you see anyone?" Keller hesitated. "Yes." "Who?" "I saw Caroline." The words landed heavily. Cole immediately asked him to repeat it. Keller said he was certain. He saw Caroline standing outside the garage. Alive, angry, arguing with someone. Who was she arguing with? Keller shook his head. "I couldn't hear everything." "But you saw who?" He looked away. Both of them. Thomas Vance, Michael Rourke, standing beside Caroline Mercer, less than 2 hours before her abandoned car was discovered. For the first time, detectives had a witness placing Caroline with the 2 men connected to her vehicle. But there was a problem. Keller waited almost a year to tell anyone. The defense would destroy him. They would ask why. Why stay silent? Why let a family suffer? Why say nothing? Keller had an answer, and it was one that explained why so many secrets survive. "I was scared. Of them." He nodded. "Of what I saw." Cole asked the question everyone needed answered. "What happened after?" Keller closed his eyes. "I left." "You left?" "I thought it was my business." His voice became quieter. "Then the next morning I saw the news." The detective waited. Keller looked directly at him. "And I knew." "Knew what?" "That something terrible happened." Investigators searched deeper into Michael Rourke's history. Unlike Vance, Rourke had vanished completely. No public records. No known address. No confirmed employment. It was as if he had erased himself. But detectives found one surviving connection. A sister living in Indiana. She agreed to speak. And what she revealed changed the case again. Michael Rourke had contacted her 3 months after Caroline disappeared. He sounded nervous, paranoid, different. He kept asking if anyone had come looking for him. Did he say why? She shook her head, but he said something strange. "What?" She looked at the detective. He said, "They think the car is a secret." Cole wrote the sentence down, slowly, because those words carried weight. The car. Everyone had been focused on the car. The abandoned vehicle. The fingerprint. The door. But maybe the car was never the secret. Maybe it was a distraction. Maybe someone wanted investigators staring at metal and glass, while the real truth remained somewhere else. The search for Michael Rourke intensified, but he was gone. Every lead ended. Every address was outdated. Every phone number disconnected. Years of disappearance had created another mystery inside the first. Then came the breakthrough nobody expected. A cold storage facility in Ohio was being demolished. Workers discovered several abandoned boxes left behind by a former tenant. The tenant's name was Michael Rourke. Inside were old tools, receipts, photographs, and a notebook, a small black notebook filled with handwritten entries. Most pages contained ordinary notes, work schedules, expenses, repair details, until investigators reached the final pages. The handwriting changed. The entries became shorter, more frantic. One sentence appeared repeatedly, over and over, like someone afraid they would forget. She knows. 3 words. No explanation. No name. Just 3 words written dozens of times. Then, on the last page, a single date. The date Caroline Mercer disappeared. And beneath it, a sentence that forced investigators to stop reading. The fingerprint was never supposed to be there. The sentence in Michael Rourke's notebook changed the entire direction of the investigation. The fingerprint was never supposed to be there. Detective Raymond Cole read it again and again. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was terrifying, because whoever wrote that sentence knew about the fingerprint, not the existence of a fingerprint in general, not some random trace left behind at a crime scene. This fingerprint, the one investigators had discovered years later, the one that reopened a case everyone believed was already dead, the one that led them back to Thomas Vance. Cole placed a notebook on the evidence table and stared at the final page. For decades, investigators had believed the fingerprint was a mistake that exposed the person responsible. But Michael Rourke's words suggested something different. The fingerprint was not the mistake. It was evidence of another mistake. Someone had planned carefully. Someone had controlled the scene. Someone had removed almost every trace. But one thing remained. One tiny mark. One small piece of truth that refused to disappear. The question was no longer who left the fingerprint. The question became, who was supposed to leave it? Investigators brought Thomas Vance back for another interview. This time, the strategy changed. They did not accuse him. They did not mention the notebook. They simply placed a photograph on the table. The final page. The sentence. Vance stared at it. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then his expression changed. Not anger. Not surprise. Fear. You found that. Cole watched him carefully. You know what it means? Vance looked toward the window. I know what happens when people start looking. Looking for what? Vance remained silent. Caroline Mercer? The name hung in the room. Vance closed his eyes. Then he whispered something investigators never expected. She wasn't supposed to disappear. Cole leaned forward. What does that mean? Vance said nothing. The interview ended 15 minutes later. No confession. No explanation. Only more questions. But investigators now knew something important. Thomas Vance was not protecting himself. He was protecting someone else. The next step was finding Michael Rourke. The problem was that Rourke had spent decades becoming invisible. He changed addresses, changed jobs, avoided official records. He had no social media, no public footprint, no obvious connections. But detectives discovered one mistake, a mistake made years earlier. Rourke had kept a notebook. People who want to hide the truth do not usually keep reminders of it, unless part of them wants to be found. Investigators analyzed every page, every word, every name. Then they discovered a pattern. The notebook was not a confession. It was a record. Rourke had documented everything. Dates, locations, conversations, and one name appeared more than any other. Not Caroline, not Thomas. A third person, William Hart, a retired county employee. A man who had never appeared in the original investigation. A man who had lived in Ashridge his entire life. And a man who had been one of the first people at Caroline's vehicle after it was discovered. Detectives froze, because William Hart was not a stranger. He was one of the people everyone trusted, a respected community figure, former volunteer firefighter, known for helping during emergencies. He had stood beside Caroline's family during the search. He had comforted Daniel. He had appeared on local television asking anyone with information to come forward. And according to Michael Rourke's notebook, he knew more than he admitted. Investigators reviewed the original crime scene, the first officers, the first volunteers, the first people who touched Caroline's vehicle. William Hart's name appeared repeatedly. He had arrived before some deputies. He had helped organize the search. He had access to information that was never publicly released. Information only investigators and someone connected to the crime should have known. Suddenly, old memories looked different. Old statements sounded different. A sentence from an early interview stood out. When reporters asked Hart what he thought happened to Caroline, he had said, "She probably never made it far from that road." At the time, nobody questioned it. But now investigators wondered, how did he know? The road had not been released. The location had been kept confidential. Only people close to the investigation knew. Detectives interviewed Hart again. He was 70 years old, retired, living quietly outside Ashridge. When they arrived, he seemed calm, almost too calm. "I wonder when you would come," he said. The detectives exchanged looks. "Why did you say that?" Hart smiled faintly, because old things always come back. Inside his house, investigators noticed something unusual. A wall covered with photographs, community events, fire department gatherings, local celebrations, and among them, a photograph from 1987, the search for Caroline Mercer, Hart standing beside volunteers. But investigators noticed something else. In the background of the photograph was a dark blue pickup truck, the same type of vehicle described by the farmer who saw the second vehicle near Caroline's abandoned car, the same type of truck connected to Michael Rourke, the same truck investigators had been searching for. Hart noticed him looking, and for the first time, his expression changed. "You remember too much," he said quietly. The detective stared at him. "What did you say?" Hart looked at the photograph. "I said people remember what they want to remember." The interview lasted 6 hours. Hart denied involvement, denied knowing Caroline, denied knowing why his name appeared in Rourke's notebook. But investigators noticed one thing. He never asked how Caroline was found. He never asked what evidence they had. He never asked why they came. He already knew. Then forensic investigators searched Hart's property. They found nothing. No weapon, no clothing, no obvious evidence. The search appeared to be another dead end, until they checked an old storage building behind his house. Inside were hundreds of personal items collected over decades. Old newspapers, community records, photographs, memorabilia, and inside a locked metal box, a small collection of objects, a bracelet, a broken necklace, a school fundraiser ticket, and a photograph of Caroline Mercer. The photograph was not from the fundraiser, not from school, not from family albums. It showed Caroline standing outside the repair shop, the same night she disappeared. The timestamp on the back was handwritten, 9:48 p.m. Investigators looked at each other. Caroline had left a fundraiser shortly after 9:30. Her drive home should have taken 15 minutes. But at 9:48, she was still alive, and someone was watching her. Someone had taken a photograph. Someone had been close enough to capture the moment. The mystery that had lasted nearly a year suddenly became something far darker, because Caroline Mercer was not randomly taken. She was followed, observed, tracked. And the person who knew the truth had been standing among the people searching for her. The town had spent months looking for a stranger, but the answer had been there all along, watching, waiting, and helping them search. The photograph of Caroline Mercer outside the repair shop became the most important piece of evidence in the entire investigation. For 11 months, detectives had searched for the moment Caroline disappeared. They searched the road, the fields, the creek, the abandoned vehicle. But they had never searched the place where her final hours may have begun, the repair shop. The photograph proved one thing beyond doubt. Caroline was alive at 9:48 p.m. She was not taken from the roadside. She was not randomly attacked while driving home. She had stopped somewhere connected to two men already tied to the case. Thomas Vance, Michael Rourke, and now, William Hart. Detective Raymond Cole returned to the old timeline. 9:30 p.m. Caroline leaves the school fundraiser. 9:48 p.m. A photograph captures her outside the repair shop. 10:45 p.m. David Keller sees lights inside the closed garage. 10:58 p.m. A dark pickup truck is seen near the road, where Caroline's vehicle is later discovered. 11:12 p.m. A witness reports seeing a vehicle leaving the area. 11:30 p.m. No confirmed sightings. Then silence. A woman disappears between two ordinary hours. That was the part that haunted investigators. There was no dramatic moment, no explosion of violence, no obvious crime scene, just a gap. A missing piece of time where someone changed the course of several lives forever. The photograph was examined again. Forensic experts studied every detail. The angle, the lighting, the background, the shadows. Then they noticed something hidden, a reflection in the window of the repair shop. At first, it looked like nothing, a blurry shape, a distorted figure. But after digital enhancement, investigators could see two people standing near the garage entrance. One was Caroline. The second person was Thomas Vance. The third figure was partially hidden. Someone taller. Someone wearing a dark jacket. Someone who appeared to be watching. The image quality was poor. The face could not be identified. But the discovery confirmed something investigators had suspected. Caroline was not alone. The question became, who was the third person? The search for answers led investigators back to William Hart. His connection to the case grew stronger with every discovery. But there was still one problem. A respected community figure becoming a suspect was difficult for people to accept. Ashridge had spent years believing Hart was one of the good ones. He organized charity events, helped during storms, volunteered at local emergencies. When rumors spread, many residents refused to believe them. He helped find her. He was there for the family. He would never do something like that. But detectives knew something the public did not. Sometimes the people closest to a tragedy were not there because they wanted answers. Sometimes they were there because they already knew them. Investigators searched deeper into Hart's past. They found that before becoming a firefighter, he had worked part-time at the same repair shop, the same shop where Caroline's vehicle was serviced, the same shop where Thomas Vance and Michael Rourke worked, the same place where Caroline was photographed hours before disappearing. The connections were no longer random. They formed a pattern. Hart knew Vance. Hart knew Rourke. Hart knew Caroline's car. Hart had access to the crime scene. And Hart had information nobody should have known. But investigators still needed something stronger, something physical, something that could survive in court. They returned to the storage box. The items found inside were carefully examined. The bracelet, the necklace, the ticket, the photograph. The investigators noticed the bracelet first. It was a simple silver chain. Small. Delicate. The kind of thing someone might wear every day. Caroline's family identified it immediately. It belonged to her. She had worn it often. But there was a problem. The bracelet had never been reported missing. According to Daniel Mercer, Caroline had been wearing it the night she disappeared. Yet somehow, it ended up inside William Hart's storage box. Hart was arrested before sunrise. The news shocked Ashridge. The man who had spent months comforting the community was now the center of the investigation. Television crews returned. Reporters surrounded the courthouse. Headlines appeared across Ohio. Local hero becomes cold case suspect. But the arrest created another mystery. William Hart still refused to talk. Not one word. Not one explanation. His attorney released a statement claiming the evidence was misunderstood. They argued that Hart collected old community items. They argued that the photograph could have been obtained from public sources. They argued that the bracelet connection proved nothing. And legally, they were right. Suspicion was not proof. A shocking discovery was not a conviction. The prosecution needed Caroline. They needed to know where she was. For her family, that was the only thing that mattered. The arrest brought attention. It brought questions. But it did not bring Caroline home. Detectives searched hundreds of locations connected to Hart. Old properties, storage facilities, abandoned buildings. Nothing. Then they received another unexpected call. Michael Rourke's sister contacted investigators again. This time, she sounded terrified. She said she had remembered something else. Something she had buried for years. After Rourke disappeared, he had contacted her one final time. Not by phone, by letter. The letter had arrived with no return address. Inside was only one page, one sentence. I tried to stop it. Investigators asked where the letter was. She said she burned it, but she remembered one detail. The envelope. There was a symbol drawn on the corner, a small mark, a triangle with a line through the center. Detectives recognized it because they had seen it before. On the back of the old photograph, found in Hart's storage box. The same symbol. The same strange marking. The same hidden connection. Suddenly, the case was no longer about one person. It was about three men who had carried the same secret for decades. Thomas Vance, Michael Rourke, William Hart. 3 names, 3 paths, 1 missing woman. Investigators brought Vance back for another interview. This time, they showed him the photograph. Not the notebook, not the fingerprint. The picture of Caroline outside the repair shop. Vance stared at it. His hands began shaking. "You were there," Cole said. Vance looked away. "Tell me what happened." Long silence. Then Vance spoke. Quietly, almost like he was exhausted from carrying the truth. "I didn't hurt her." Cole waited. "Then who did?" Vance closed his eyes. "The man who told us he would fix everything." "Who?" Vance looked directly at the detective and finally said the name, William Hart. The room went silent. But before detectives could ask another question, Vance added something that changed everything. He wasn't trying to hide a murder. Cole frowned. Then what was he hiding? Vance swallowed. The reason Caroline disappeared, which was... Vance looked toward the one-way mirror, then whispered, because she found out what they had been doing for years. And for the first time in nearly a year, investigators realized they might not have been chasing a disappearance. They might have been chasing a secret. Thomas Vance's words changed the case forever, not because they solved the mystery, but because they revealed something far worse. Caroline Mercer had not disappeared because of a random encounter. She had not vanished because of a moment of violence on a lonely road. She had discovered something powerful enough to make 3 men risk everything to keep it hidden. Detective Raymond Cole sat across from Vance, watching every movement. The man who had spent months refusing to speak was finally opening the door. But Cole knew better than to rush. The truth rarely came out all at once. It came in pieces, broken pieces. Pieces that had to be carefully placed together before they showed the full picture. What was Caroline investigating? Cole asked. Vance stared at the table. She wasn't investigating. Then what? She found it by accident. What did she find? Vance remained silent. The detective waited. Finally, Vance spoke. The repair shop. Cole looked confused. The garage. Vance nodded. Years ago, that place wasn't just a repair shop. He took a deep breath. It was where people brought things they didn't want anyone to see. The statement sounded impossible, but investigators had learned one thing during the case. Impossible things sometimes survived because nobody wanted to believe them. Vance explained that the repair shop had been involved in more than vehicle repairs. For years, employees had used the business after hours, moving items, storing documents, changing records. Small things at first, things that seemed harmless, until they became something bigger. What kind of documents? Vance looked up. County records. The room went quiet. William Hart had spent years working for the county. He had access, connections, trust, the kind of position that allowed someone to move through a system without being questioned. According to Vance, Hart had discovered a way to manipulate old property records, land transfers, ownership files, financial documents. The details were complicated, but the result was simple. People lost what belonged to them, and nobody knew why. Caroline had discovered irregularities while helping a parent at her school. A family was fighting to keep their home. The paperwork did not make sense. Names had changed. Dates had been altered. Records disappeared. Caroline was not a detective. She was not a journalist. She was a teacher. But she had one quality that made dangerous people nervous. She asked questions, and she kept asking. She followed the paperwork. She followed the names. And eventually, she followed the trail back to the repair shop, the same place connected to William Hart, Thomas Vance, Michael Rourke, the same place where her vehicle had been serviced, the same place where she was photographed hours before disappearing. Cole listened carefully. Why didn't you tell anyone? Vance looked ashamed. Because I was afraid. Of Hart. Vance nodded. He had everyone believing he was untouchable. What about Rourke? Vance looked away. Michael wanted out. And you? Vance was silent. That silence was the answer. You stayed. Vance nodded. I stayed. The confession was not complete. It was not enough for court, but it gave investigators something they had never had before. A reason. Un motive. A possible explanation for why Caroline became a target. But one question remained. What happened after she arrived at the repair shop? Vance said he did not know everything. He claimed he left before the situation became violent. But he admitted something important. Caroline had confronted Hart. She had evidence. She had copies of documents. And she threatened to expose everything. She said she was going to the police. Vance whispered. Cole leaned forward. What did Hart do? Vance looked down. He smiled. The answer sent a chill through the room, because it suggested something investigators had feared. Hart was not surprised. He was prepared. Investigators immediately returned to William Hart's property. This time, they searched differently. They were no longer looking for Caroline. They were looking for the reason she disappeared. Behind a false wall inside the storage building, they discovered another hidden compartment. Inside were folders, hundreds of pages, property documents, financial records, names, dates, signatures, evidence of years of manipulation. But among the paperwork was something that made every investigator stop. A handwritten note. The handwriting matched William Hart. The note contained only one sentence. She knows too much. The date was 2 days before Caroline disappeared. The evidence was finally forming a story. But stories were not enough. They needed Caroline. They needed to know what happened after she left the repair shop. A massive search operation began. Investigators focused on locations connected to Hart. Old properties, abandoned buildings, land owned through suspicious transfers. Every piece of land became a possibility. The search lasted weeks, then months. Still nothing. Caroline's family waited. Again. The same painful cycle. Hope, search, silence. Daniel Mercer sat through every update, every press conference, every new discovery. But every night, he returned to the same empty house, the same bedroom, the same unanswered question. Where was his wife? Then, almost 40 years after Caroline vanished, investigators received the call they had been waiting for. A construction crew working outside Ashridge had discovered something unusual, an old underground structure, hidden beneath an abandoned property, a place that had not appeared on any official map. The property records trace back to a name from the old investigation, William Hart. Detectives arrived before sunrise. The entrance was covered with decades of dirt and debris. Inside, they found old equipment, boxes, files, personal belongings, and something that made the entire investigation stop. A blue jacket, stored carefully, protected from damage. A jacket matching the one worn by the unknown figure in the old photograph. The jacket was sent for forensic testing. The results came back days later. A partial DNA profile. Not complete. Not enough for immediate identification, but enough to confirm one thing. Someone connected to Caroline's disappearance had been inside that hidden room. Then investigators found something else. A small metal container. Inside was a collection of items. A broken necklace. A fundraiser ticket. A handwritten letter. And a final photograph. Caroline Mercer. Alive. Standing inside the hidden underground room. The picture was dated. The night she disappeared. But what shocked investigators was not the photograph itself. It was what was written on the back. 5 words. 5 words that changed everything. She agreed to come. For years, everyone believed Caroline had been taken, forced, attacked, hidden. But the photograph suggested another possibility. A possibility nobody had considered. Maybe Caroline walked into that place willingly. Maybe she knew the people involved. Maybe she believed she was meeting someone who could help her. And maybe that trust was the reason she never came home. The cold case that began with an empty car, now had a photograph, a hidden room, and a secret buried beneath the town. But one mystery remained. Why would Caroline Mercer agree to meet the people who wanted her silent? And what happened after that final photograph was taken? The photograph changed the meaning of everything investigators thought they knew. For decades, Caroline Mercer had been remembered as a woman who vanished without warning, a mother who disappeared on the drive home, a teacher who never reached her front door, a name attached to one of Ohio's most haunting unsolved mysteries. But now, hidden beneath years of silence, investigators discovered something unexpected. Caroline did not walk into the darkness by accident. She walked there because she believed someone had the answers she needed, and that realization was more disturbing than any theory they had considered. Detective Raymond Cole stood inside the underground room beneath the abandoned Hart property, staring at the photograph. The image was small, faded, almost destroyed by time, but it showed enough. Caroline Mercer, standing inside the hidden room, holding a folder, looking directly at the camera, not frightened, not restrained, not injured, just standing there, waiting. The investigators had spent years searching for the moment Caroline was taken. But maybe there was no moment. Maybe the real mystery was the conversation that happened before. What did she know? Who did she trust? And why did she enter a place connected to 3 men who had spent decades hiding the truth? The forensic team continued processing the underground room. Every surface was examined. Every object was cataloged. The room appeared to have been used for years. There were shelves, old filing cabinets, boxes filled with documents, a small table, 2 chairs. It looked less like a hiding place and more like an office, a secret office, a place where information was stored away from public eyes. Investigators discovered hundreds of pages connected to property disputes throughout the county, families who had lost land, record that had changed, documents that appeared and disappeared, names that had been removed. William Hart had not been protecting a random secret. He had been protecting a system that had existed for years. And Caroline had found the cracks. The question was whether she found them too late. The hidden room revealed another important clue, a calendar hanging on the wall. Most dates were meaningless. Old meetings, appointments, business notes. But one date was circled, November 18th, 1987, the night Caroline disappeared. Under the date was a handwritten note. Final meeting. Investigators immediately compared the handwriting. It matched the note found earlier. She knows too much. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. William Hart knew Caroline was coming. He prepared for the meeting, and he documented it. But the biggest discovery came from a small audio cassette found inside the desk drawer. A cassette nobody knew existed. The technology was outdated. The tape was damaged. But forensic specialists managed to recover parts of the recording. The first seconds contained only static, then voices. A woman, a man. The investigators froze when they heard the first clear sentence. It was Caroline. How many people have you done this to? Silence. Then a man's voice. Calm, controlled. More than you could ever prove. The room went quiet. The investigators listened again. Parts were destroyed. But the conversation continued. Caroline sounded angry, not afraid. You think nobody will find out? The man answered, people find what they're allowed to find. Then another voice appeared, a second man, Michael Rourke. The identification was confirmed through old recordings and family samples. We should stop this. The first man responded, you should have thought about that years ago. The tape ended. But those few minutes changed the investigation. Caroline had confronted them. She had discovered the truth. And someone in that room believed he could control everything. Investigators now had a clearer picture of what happened that night. But one piece was still missing. What happened after the recording stopped? Where did Caroline go? And who moved her vehicle to the roadside? The answer appeared in another forgotten piece of evidence. The original crime scene photographs. The ones Detective Cole had reviewed hundreds of times. A small detail near the abandoned car. A tire mark. At the time, investigators believed it belonged to a passing vehicle. But new technology revealed something different. The tire pattern matched an older model pickup truck. The same type owned by William Hart. The same truck seen by the farmer. The same vehicle connected to the repair shop. The car had not been abandoned by a stranger. Someone known had moved it. Someone who knew exactly how to avoid attention. They discovered something strange. The vehicle had disappeared shortly after Caroline vanished. Officially, Hart reported selling it, but the buyer's name did not exist. The paperwork was fake. Another missing record. Another hidden lie. The pattern was becoming clear. Everywhere investigators looked, they found the same thing. Missing information. Changed documents. False records. A trail designed to disappear. Then came the final piece connecting Thomas Vance. During another interview, Vance finally admitted what he had done. He confessed that after Caroline left the underground room, Hart ordered him to move her car. Why? Vance looked broken. Because he wanted everyone looking at the road. What happened to Caroline? Vance closed his eyes. I don't know. Cole stared at him. You expect us to believe that? Vance whispered. I saw her leave. Leave with who? Vance hesitated, then said, Michael. The statement created another shock, because Michael Rourke had spent decades being described as someone trying to escape Hart. But according to Vance, Rourke was the last person seen with Caroline. Investigators reopened the search for Michael Rourke. But this time, they were not looking for a suspect. They were looking for the missing link, the man who might know where Caroline's story ended. Weeks later, they found him, not hiding, not running, living quietly in a small town under his real name, older, sick, and carrying a secret for nearly 4 decades. When detectives arrived, Rourke did not deny who he was. He simply looked at the badge in front of him. Then he said, I wondered how long it would take. The detectives entered his home. On the wall was a single photograph, an old photograph, Caroline Mercer, the same photograph from the hidden room. But this copy had something different written on the back. A message that revealed the final terrifying truth about the night she disappeared. 3 words. She was alive. And suddenly, after all those years, the biggest mystery was no longer who caused Caroline Mercer's disappearance. It was why someone had allowed the world to believe she was dead. The words written on the back of the photograph changed the entire investigation. She was alive. 3 words. Simple. Because for nearly 40 years, Caroline Mercer had existed in the minds of everyone who loved her as a woman frozen in one terrible moment. A woman whose final chapter was unknown. A woman whose family had been forced to live between hope and grief. But Michael Rourke's photograph suggested something impossible. Caroline did not vanish the moment she entered the underground room. She survived after that. The question that had haunted investigators for decades became something even darker. How long? And who knew? Detective Raymond Cole had spent most of his career searching for missing people. He knew every case had a turning point, a moment where the story changed. For Caroline Mercer, that moment had arrived, but the truth was not bringing closure. It was creating more questions. Inside Rourke's house, investigators searched every room. They expected evidence. They expected secrets. What they found was something unexpected. A timeline. Michael Rourke had kept records. Not a confession. Not an apology. A record of events. Photographs. Newspaper clippings. Handwritten notes. Almost as if he had spent his entire life waiting for someone to ask. In a locked drawer, investigators found a small notebook, different from the one recovered years earlier. This one contained dates after Caroline's disappearance. The first entry was only days after November 18, 1987. She understands now. The second entry came 3 weeks later. Hart believed the problem is solved. The third entry appeared months later. I cannot continue this. Detectives read every page. The notebook described fear, regret, arguments, and a secret that became harder to maintain with every passing year. According to Rourke's notes, Caroline had discovered the illegal operation involving William Hart, but she had also discovered something else. Something Hart feared more than exposure. Someone inside the operation was stealing from him. Someone was manipulating the records for personal gain, and Caroline had found proof. Hart did not simply want to silence her. He wanted the evidence back, the files, the documents, the names, everything Caroline had collected. The meeting inside the underground room was supposed to be a negotiation. At least, that was what Caroline believed. Rourke wrote that she thought she could convince them to stop. She believed if she showed them the evidence, they would understand the damage they were causing. She believed they would choose to fix what they had done. But she underestimated one thing: fear. People who build their lives around secrets do not usually surrender when the truth appears. They protect the secret, no matter the cost. The notebook described the final moments inside the room, the argument, the threats, the panic, then a sentence that made investigators stop. Hart never intended to let her walk away. For decades, everyone had searched for the person who took Caroline. But according to Rourke, the plan was never about taking her. It was about controlling what happened next. Investigators immediately searched for more information about Rourke's actions after the disappearance. They discovered he had left Ohio because he believed he was next. He thought Hart would eliminate anyone who could expose him. So he ran. He changed his identity. He disappeared. But he kept the evidence. The photographs, the notebooks, the memories, because part of him wanted the truth to survive. The investigators asked Rourke the question that had remained unanswered. Where is Caroline Mercer? The elderly man looked down. His hands trembled. I don't know. The detectives exchanged looks. After everything? After the notebook? After the photographs? He still claimed he did not know. But then Rourke said something that changed the direction again. I know where she was taken. The room became silent. Taken where? Rourke looked toward the window. The old Miller property. The name immediately appeared in the investigation files. A forgotten piece of land outside Ashridge. A location connected to William Hart. A property searched briefly in the early investigation, then abandoned because investigators found nothing. But they searched it nearly 40 years ago, before modern technology, before ground imaging, before forensic methods had changed. A new search began. This time, nothing was overlooked. The Miller property covered nearly 20 acres. dense woods, old structures, abandoned farmland, the kind of place where secrets could survive for generations. Teams searched for days. Then came the discovery. Beneath an old collapsed barn, investigators found a hidden concrete structure, not on any property records, not visible from the surface. Inside was a small room, empty, except for one object, a wooden box. Inside the box were personal belongings, a watch, a pair of glasses, a school identification card, and a handwritten letter. The handwriting was immediately recognized. Caroline Mercer. The letter was dated 3 days after her disappearance. 3 days. She had survived. She had written something. Something that had remained hidden for decades. The letter began with one sentence. If someone finds this, it means I was not able to return. Detectives read the pages carefully. Caroline described the events after the meeting. She wrote that she was being held against her will, but she also wrote something unexpected. Someone was helping her. Someone inside the operation. Someone she believed she could trust. The letter never revealed the person's name. The final page was missing. The most important page. The one that could explain everything. But near the bottom of the remaining page was a sentence written in a different color ink. A warning. Do not trust a man who finds this. Investigators stared at the message, because the discovery created a terrifying possibility. Someone had found the letter before them. Someone had been inside the hidden room after Caroline wrote it. And suddenly, the case was not just about a crime from 1987. It was about someone who had spent decades protecting the truth. A person who was still alive. A person who knew exactly what happened. The investigation turned back toward the people closest to the case. Thomas Vance, Michael Rourke, William Hart, and now, the unknown person who found Caroline's final message. Then investigators made one more discovery, a fingerprint, not on the old car, not on the photograph, not on the documents, on the wooden box containing Caroline's letter, a fresh fingerprint, left there years after the disappearance. The cold case that had been frozen for decades suddenly became active again because someone had returned. Someone had opened the box. Someone had read Caroline Mercer's final words. And someone had tried to make sure nobody else ever did. The new fingerprint was unlike anything investigators had found before. For decades, every piece of evidence connected to Caroline Mercer had been trapped in the past. Old photographs, old documents, old memories. Everything belonged to 1987. But this fingerprint was different. It was recent. It was a message left by someone who believed the truth could still be controlled. Detective Raymond Cole stared at the forensic report late into the night. The print did not belong to William Hart. It did not belong to Thomas Vance. It did not belong to Michael Rourke. The 3 names that had dominated the investigation for months were suddenly pushed aside. A 4th person had entered the story. Someone who had returned to Caroline's hidden letter years after she disappeared. Someone who knew exactly where it was hidden. Someone who knew the investigators would eventually find it. The question was simple. Who? The fingerprint was processed through the database. The search took several hours. Then the results came back. No match. The person was not in the system. But investigators discovered something else. The print was not completely unknown. A partial pattern matched a fingerprint collected during the original investigation. A fingerprint from someone who had been at the crime scene. Someone who had been considered irrelevant. Someone who had stood beside Caroline's abandoned vehicle on the first morning of the search. The name appeared in the old records. Daniel Mercer. Caroline's husband. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The room that had been filled with certainty suddenly became silent, because the case had reached a place investigators never expected. The person closest to Caroline was now connected to the newest evidence. But Raymond Cole knew something important. A fingerprint was a clue, not a conclusion. People touched objects. People moved through crime scenes. People left traces without meaning to. The question was not whether Daniel's fingerprint was there. The question was why. Why was it on the box? Why was the box opened? And what did Daniel know about the hidden room? Investigators returned to Daniel Mercer's old statements. For decades, he had been seen as the grieving husband, the man who waited, the man who searched, the man who lost the love of his life. But now detectives reviewed every interview with new eyes, not with suspicion, with attention. And they noticed something strange. Daniel had always described Caroline's disappearance the same way, too perfectly. He always said she was taken from the road. He always said she never reached a repair shop. He always said he believed a stranger was responsible. But nobody had ever told him about the repair shop. Nobody had ever told him Caroline was seen there. That information had remained confidential. Yet, during one interview years earlier, Daniel had said something unusual. Whoever did this knew where she was going. At the time, investigators ignored it. Now it felt different. How could Daniel know she was going somewhere? Unless Caroline had told him, or unless someone else had. Detectives requested another interview. Daniel agreed. He arrived older, tired, carrying nearly 4 decades of grief. When Cole placed a photograph of Caroline outside the repair shop on the table, Daniel stared at it. But he did not look shocked. He looked sad, a reaction investigators noticed immediately. "You knew," Cole said. Daniel looked down. "I knew she was investigating something." The admission changed everything. For years, Daniel had never mentioned it. Daniel rubbed his hands together. "Because she asked me not to tell police, not to tell anyone." "Why?" Daniel looked toward the window. "Because she thought someone was watching us." The room became quiet. Daniel explained that weeks before Caroline disappeared, she had become different. She checked the locks. She avoided certain conversations. She stopped bringing paperwork home. She believed someone was following her, but she did not know who. "Did she tell you about William Hart?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes." "Thomas Vance?" "Yes." "Michael Rourke?" Daniel looked away. "Yes." Cole leaned forward. "Then why didn't you tell us?" Daniel's answer was simple. "Because she was afraid." The detective waited. Afraid of what? Daniel swallowed. That if she disappeared, everyone would look in the wrong direction. The words were almost identical to what investigators had spent years discovering. Caroline knew. She knew the truth would be hidden. She knew people would search for the wrong answers. And she had prepared. Daniel admitted that 3 days before she vanished, Caroline gave him an envelope. She told him not to open it unless something happened. What happened to the envelope? Daniel closed his eyes. "I destroyed it." Cole stared at him. "Why?" "Because after she disappeared, someone came to my house." "Who?" Daniel did not answer immediately. Then he whispered, "William Hart." The investigation shifted again. Hart had not only been connected to Caroline, he had visited her husband after she vanished. What did he say? Daniel looked exhausted. He said Caroline had made a mistake. What mistake? Daniel looked directly at Cole, trusting the wrong person. The interview continued for hours. Daniel revealed that after Hart left, he searched through the house. He found hidden notes Caroline had left behind. Most were meaningless, but one contained a location, the Miller property, the same place where investigators had found the wooden box. Daniel admitted he went there years later. That was how his fingerprint ended up on the box. He had been searching, not hiding, looking for his wife. The newest evidence no longer pointed to Daniel as a suspect. Instead, it revealed something more painful. He had known pieces of the truth, but he had been afraid to speak. Because Caroline had trusted him with a secret, and he had spent decades carrying the burden alone. But one question remained. If Daniel knew about the Miller property, who removed the final page from Caroline's letter? Investigators compared the fingerprint from the box again. This time, they searched beyond criminal databases. They searched employment records, government records, old investigation files. And finally, they found a match. The fingerprint belonged to someone unexpected, someone who had never been considered a suspect, someone who had helped search for Caroline, Someone who had stood beside the Mercer family during their darkest days. The fingerprint belonged to David Keller, the former repair shop employee, the man who claimed he was only a witness, the man who said he was afraid, the man who had first revealed seeing Caroline alive. Investigators immediately returned to his home. But David Keller was gone. His house was empty. The furniture remained. The lights were still on. A coffee cup sat on the kitchen table, as if he had left only minutes earlier. On the wall was a single piece of paper, a handwritten message, only one sentence. I was trying to protect her. And beneath it, a location. A place investigators had never searched. A place that would finally reveal what happened after Caroline Mercer wrote her final letter. A place where the last secret of the Ohio cold case had been waiting for nearly 40 years. The location written on David Keller's wall was not a random place. It was not another abandoned building, not another forgotten property, not another empty field where investigators would spend weeks searching through dirt and silence. It was somewhere nobody had ever thought to look. The old Ashridge County Archive building, a place that had been closed for nearly 20 years. A place filled with boxes nobody had opened since the 1990s. A place where forgotten records, old reports, and sealed documents were stored away from public view. Detective Raymond Cole looked at the message again. I was trying to protect her. Those words could mean anything. A confession, an apology, or a warning. The problem was that David Keller had disappeared before explaining. And people who disappear after leaving messages usually know something they do not want to say out loud. The investigation moved immediately. By sunrise, officers surrounded the abandoned archive building. The structure looked like it belonged to another era. Broken windows, rusting doors, dust covering every surface. The kind of place where the past was not remembered. It was buried. Inside, investigators found thousands of boxes, county records, old legal documents, historical files, everything that had accumulated over decades. Searching the building would take weeks. But then one investigator noticed something. A section of shelves near the back wall had been moved recently. The dust pattern was different. Someone had opened this area. Not years ago. Recently. Behind the shelves was a narrow passage, a hidden storage area. Inside were 3 boxes. No labels, no dates, only one marking. The same symbol investigators had seen before. A triangle with a line through the center. The symbol connected everything. William Hart, Michael Rourke, the repair shop, Caroline Mercer, and now David Keller. The first box contained financial records. The second contained photographs. The third contained something that made investigators stop. A complete copy of Caroline Mercer's missing file. Not the official police file. A private file, created by someone watching the investigation from the outside. Inside were newspaper articles, police reports, witness statements, and handwritten notes. Someone had been following every step of the case, every discovery, every mistake, every false lead. Then investigators found the name written on the first page, David Keller. For years, Keller claimed he had stayed silent because he was afraid, but the documents revealed something different. He had not simply watched the investigation. He had been collecting information, tracking evidence, recording conversations, trying to understand what happened. The question became, was David Keller hiding the truth, or was he protecting it? Investigators searched the boxes carefully. Among the documents was a letter, but this one was different. Unlike the letter found at the Miller property, this one had a complete ending. It had never been seen before. The letter was addressed to David Keller. The first sentence immediately changed everything. I know you are not like them. Detectives read the letter line by line. Caroline explained that she had discovered the operation at the repair shop. She knew William Hart was involved. She knew Thomas Vance and Michael Rourke had helped him, but she also knew someone else inside the group was uncomfortable. Someone who wanted to leave. Someone who wanted to expose the truth. That person was David Keller. Caroline wrote that Keller had secretly helped her copy documents. He had warned her about the meeting. He had told her not to trust Hart, but he was too afraid to confront him directly. The letter revealed something investigators never expected. David Keller was not part of the crime. He was a witness who became trapped, a man who saw the truth but lacked the courage to reveal it until it was too late. But one question remained. If Keller helped Caroline, why did he disappear? The answer was found in the final paragraph of the letter. Caroline wrote, "If something happens to me, David knows where the original evidence is." The original evidence. Not copies, not photographs. The documents that could destroy everything. The documents William Hart spent years trying to erase. Investigators searched the archive room again. This time they looked for something hidden, something small, something that could survive decades. Behind a loose panel inside one of the old cabinets, they found a sealed envelope. Inside were dozens of original property records, names, dates, signatures, proof, the entire operation. The evidence Caroline had discovered, the evidence she had risked everything to expose. But there was one more item inside the envelope, a photograph, not of Caroline, not of the repair shop, not of the investigation. A photograph of David Keller, taken in 1987, standing beside Caroline, and on the back were handwritten words. The only person who tried to help. For investigators, the picture answered one question. David Keller had been telling the truth, but it created another. Where was he now? The search for Keller intensified. His phone was disconnected, his bank account untouched. His vehicle was found abandoned near an old highway. Inside was a notebook. The final entry was written only days earlier. "They know I kept the evidence." Investigators immediately realized the danger. Someone else was still protecting the secret. Someone who had survived the original investigation. Someone who knew Keller was finally going to talk. The focus returned to William Hart. But Hart had died 3 years earlier. He could no longer answer questions. Thomas Vance was already in custody. Michael Rourke was cooperating, which left only one possibility. Someone else. Someone outside the original group. Someone who had helped cover the truth for decades. Investigators reviewed every person connected to case, every officer, every volunteer, every official. Then they found a name buried in the original paperwork. A person who had handled evidence during the first investigation. A person who had access to everything. A person who had signed off on reports. The original evidence technician. A man named Stephen Caldwell. He had retired years earlier. He had never been questioned, because nobody had ever considered him important. But his signature appeared on one document that changed everything. The report that declared Caroline's vehicle contained no unknown fingerprints. The report that delayed the discovery for decades. The report that claimed the driver's side door contained nothing useful. The same door where the fingerprint was eventually found. The evidence had not disappeared. It had been ignored. And now investigators had to answer the most disturbing question of all. Was the fingerprint overlooked, or was it hidden? Because after 40 years, the Ohio cold case was no longer about a missing woman. It was about a truth that had been buried by the very people trusted to uncover it. And somewhere, David Keller was still missing, carrying the final piece of Caroline Mercer's story. The piece that would reveal what happened after the photograph was taken. The piece that would finally answer the question everyone had been asking since 1987. Where did Caroline go?